In this special episode of my deep dive into the British Museum in London, you're gonna find this invaluable tablet from ancient Egypt used by a farmer as the grindstone, a lion getting repeatedly stabbed in the head, and me talking about the good old days of traveling to Easter Island. So sit tight, hit that like button, and let's begin. Welcome to the great imperial capital of London, United Kingdom. I only have a very short period amount of time here, but I've been here 4 or 5 times yet. So this time I'll only show you a little bit interesting places, and also I'll perhaps go into the Great British Museum, because every single time I go, it is completely filled with people. But these days, it is just as dead as doornails. So let's explore. Welcome to the British Museum, and if there is history, you can find it here. Whether it is ancient Roman marble statues, like this one, or some ancient Egyptians carving right next to me here. And we begin our tour straight in the Atrium, where you can see 2 awe-inspiring totems coming directly from my home province in Western Canada. The local chieftain begrudgingly sold these totems to the British explorers in 1903 after the introduced diseases wiped out the entire village on Haida Gwaii. These 2 giants used to sit in front of the village, and you can clearly see the chieftain holding a pole standing at the top, along with a shaman holding 2 rattles made of puffin beaks. Seeing this kind of red cedar frontal pole really brought me back to where I came from, but we are here to explore much more exotic things. And where should I begin? And there is no better way to begin the tour with the Enlightment Gallery. This is where British Museum found its footing, because at this time Britain was becoming a great colonial and naval power, and this is when it started to collect things from all around the world. In this gallery, it depicts what most of the scientists, historians, and other scholars think the world is like at that time. So it has a lot of not exactly accurate information that will not stand the test of time or the test of Twitter these days.
Now, they're minerals. Jesus, Marie, I got some geodes coming that are very delicate, all right?
And sat in the middle of the hallway, among the descriptions of inferior races in Africa and Asia, as well as a bunch of rocks, minerals, collected from all around the world, is this Piranesi vase, said to be once owned by the famous Roman Emperor Hadrian. And then you must be thinking, why is this vase sitting in the middle of a hallway dedicated to the 18th century? Well, you see, the Italian Giovanni Piranesi, who worked on this vase, took a little bit of creative liberty. The fragments of the original were stuck onto a triangular base and served as a decoration in his mansion for a long time. And now it looks more like a Frankenstein from the late 18th century rather than an ancient Roman artifact. And there is not a better reflection of how the world works at that time than this very vase. But next door in the Egyptian hall harbors the most precious stone the entire Britain has to offer. And standing behind me is probably the most famous item in the entire museum and probably of the Western civilization, the Rosetta Stone. It is the key to deciphering the Egyptian language, the hieroglyphs, because before its discovery in 1799, nobody knew exactly how it happens. But now, thanks to Rosetta Stone, because it's carved in 3 different languages, we were able to basically decipher how the language is used. Basically what they will do is actually they will compose the entire word phonetically, right? So for example, for a cat, it will be M-I-W, mew, and then followed by the picture of the cat itself. So actually every single word is written twice. And the two other languages are Greek and Demotic text. Greek is very well understood at the time, so it was very easy to reverse translate the entire thing backwards and figure out what this decree was talking about. And then figuring out the hieroglyphs were a piece of cake. And the Demotic text is fundamentally a simplified version of the hieroglyphs, as the latter was way too complex and difficult to carve and read. So slowly over the time, anyone who has not gone through years of training as a scribe would simply use the Demotic text as the normal method of communication and expression. And since we could crack open the hieroglyphs using the Rosetta Stone thanks to the Greek text at the bottom, the Demotic text would quickly figure out as just another kind of phonetic construction. So in some ways, this small slab of rock that used to line the city defensive walls of Rosetta cracked Egyptology wide open. And talking about Egyptology, this hallway must be heaven for any Egyptologist. It features dozens upon dozens of invaluable objects of every single dynasty of ancient Egypt. And one of the most pronounced items you can see is the colossal statue of Ramses II sitting in the middle. He is kinda known for erecting huge statues for himself, perhaps compensating for something. And this particular statue is the upper part that the British managed to take home, while the lower part of the king sitting is still left in Egypt. It weighs a whopping 20 tons and was quarried in Aswan and was transported all the way up north for 200 kilometers. And just like everything in ancient Egypt, it was supposed to be painted with pitch black eyes and rosy skin. And if you think getting drawn and quartered by the British is a very gruesome fate, take a look of this stone plaque called the Shabako stone. It was used as a millstone, so you can see there's a hole drilled in the middle, and all the radiating rays come from the mill spinning on top of this ancient artifact, rendering half of its script completely illegible. The hieroglyph used on this plaque was very archaic, and the preface explained that a Kushite king copied this entire thing from a worm-eaten scroll from ancient Egypt, so likely the use of archaic hieroglyph was necessary. And well, we just have to get even worse from that. This is the sarcophagus of Nectanebo II, the last native Egyptian king, who lost his position right before Alexander the Great conquered the entire empire. And unbelievably, this rocky miracle was used as a bathtub in a bathhouse located in Alexandria. So now the inside, which bears the figures of funerary gods such as Anubis, the sons of Horus, and many more, are completely illegible. The outside carvings of the hieroglyphs are still clearly discernible, which talks about the sun god's nightly journey through the Osiris realm of darkness, including all kinds of challenges and regions. This is supposed to signal that this dead pharaoh will join the sun god in its nightly journey and eventually rejuvenate every single day. Up next is the false gate of Ptah-shepsis. This is a funeral false gate that used to demonstrate the gateway towards the afterlife for this high priest that served one of the most important gods in Memphis, the capital of ancient Egypt. And unlike a lot of others of its kind that usually only describe the journey of the afterlife, this one surprisingly featured a biography of the man himself. He was one of the most respected persons even by the king himself, and married his granddaughter, and eventually served 6 more pharaohs after his original master's demise. So this was truly an incredible find. And there are many more artifacts that are worth mentioning. However, it is impossible for me to sit down and discuss each one of these in detail with you, and you'll be much better off going to the British Museum yourself and check out all of the incredible items they have on display. And now we move on to a cousin of ancient Egypt that is talked about much less. Let's head over to the hallway next door and explore where the 2 famous rivers cross their paths. And And let's begin our journey in Assyria with Ashurnasirpal's standard inscription. This is a block of over 1,000 words praising all of his accomplishments in the lifetime, ranging from his wartime bravery to his incredible demonstration of manhood, and it is plastered at every single panel and repeated for hundreds upon hundreds of times on the northwest side of his massive palace. Now I'm starting to get the impression that all of the ancient kings and emperors and pharaohs are trying to compensate for something. And line the walls of the modern museum hallway is a different kind of panel, the one depicting capture of Lachish. It talks about the story of the conquest of the Assyrian king after the king of Judah decided to stage a rebellion against the empire. He chose not to go to Jerusalem but stopped by the important strategic city of Lachish and defeated the soldiers of both Judah and its Egyptian allies. And afterwards, he laid the magnificent city to complete waste. And these panels talk about his magnificent conquest and subsequent devastation of this once important city. It was so historically significant, you can even find descriptions of this war in modern Bible. And another series of Assyrian panels depict the royal lion hunt. It was a popular sport for the king and the king only. The captured lions would be released into an arena. And here you can see the king is using a spear and penetrated through the lion's head, while it is struggling to bite the wheel of the chariot. And another attendant holds the royal bow next to the pointed-headed king and was ready to jump in to help. And on this side, the king was ready to slay the lion. He had his sword drawn and was poised to deliver the final blow, while another lion on the other side just received its first shot in the eye. However, this much cuneiform was slowly turning my brain into a triangle itself, and I had to begrudgingly leave these two gigantic hallways to the west side of the atrium, because these are just the 2 out of the 300 rooms the entire museum has on offer, and even though it was my 4th time in the British Museum, I still could not believe how big the entire establishment was. I barely glimpsed through some of the most important artifacts they have on offer in these 2 halls, and I had already spent 5 solid hours standing in front of the precious artifacts and examining those details. So I had to briefly walk through the Hellenistic and the classical Antiquity period in Greece, which offers quite a lot of interesting items that I did not have time to go into detail, as I had already explored the Minoan creature on the island of Crete in one of my journeys through the entire island a few years ago. So seeing them coming back in front of my eyes brings me all the way back to those good old times. You have the ever so iconic vases, a stereotypical sarcophagus featuring all of the necessary precession artwork that is mandatory for any of the Minoan artifacts, and a bunch of tiny figurines that are very difficult to preserve and are almost impossible to find outside the British Museum nowadays. But time was running short as the museum was about to close, so I headed back the next day for round 2, and we begin in the middle of the central hallway. Well folks, let me introduce you to this Moai statue. No, not that meme version. This one is the legit real one. Hoa Hakananaya is one of the most important moais on the entire Easter Island. It was situated on a cliff in the ceremonial village of Orongo. Yes, I have been there, and the lack of a ceremonial moai there was very devastating. And unlike its other brethren I found throughout Easter Island, this big boy is carved from hard basalt, rather than the volcanic stone that is very prone to erosion. So in the backside, you can see it is meticulously decorated with all kinds of religious symbol, which is lacking in all of its other brethren back home on the island. The British managed to drag this hardy beast all the way from the middle of nowhere in the Pacific Ocean, and they have been sitting in the museum since Queen Victoria got bored playing with it. And thus, one of the most prominent displays in the museum and one of the most sorely missed items back in Easter Island. And downstairs from the Moai is the African Atrium. It features thousands upon thousands of artifacts stolen from all around the continent, and offers a very interesting insight into every single region of this vast land, such as the different styles of pottery juxtapositioned against each other on this customized display almost looking like a tree, with all kinds of styles, sizes, and materials. And you can find blades in every single kind of interesting shapes, demonstrated in a glass case, showcasing showcasing all kinds of evolution as well as purpose. I think some of the most intricately designed ones are definitely for rituals, as they have detailed carvings and weird shapes that are way too impractical for battles. Meanwhile, opposite on the other end of the atrium features hundreds upon hundreds of ceremonial masks. These are very important items used by the shamans when they conduct their rituals, either dancing by the fire, communicating with the gods through incense, or chanting in their underground bungalows. Some are very scary, some are ominous, some are just plain out funny, but there is one thing in common of all of these guys. It is that they are all important pieces of African culture. And talking about interesting culture, here is a Nigerian ancestry screen that the people use to worship their ancestors since most of them have been long gone. This wooden screen, detailedly carved and carefully decorated, is the official representation of all of your ancestors. So whatever you are seeking, counsel or forgiveness, you have to come in front of this very artifact. And there are just way too many other things on display that I either do not have the knowledge to explain or simply do not have the time to even check out. As Africa is a huge continent and there is no way you can see every aspect of all of its different kinds of culture just within 1 or 2 hours. But there is one specific kind of item that I want to introduce you to. And right behind me is probably one of the most impressive African metalworks date. And it is the famous Benin brass, or are they bronze? Yeah, bronze plates, but they are actually made of bronze and brass. Sadly, most of these are actually acquired basically illegally because the official reason was spoils of war, as Benin was actively resisting the British colonial influence in the 18th century, so they just decided to invade, killed everyone, took all their stuffs, and looted all of these plaques mounted in the shrines and palaces. And now there should be a lot of dialogues that is currently going on to reacquire these back to Benin because these are unlawfully acquired. And the last section that I managed to browse through is the Mesoamerica collection. As I have traveled extensively in Latin America, and the ancient Mayan architecture and culture were some of the cultures that I am the most interested in on this entire planet. And here you can see quite a few lintels transported all the way from Yaxchilan, an ancient Mayan city buried deep in the border between modern Mexico and Guatemala. A lintel is a slab of stone usually featured at the top of an entry to a doorway, and the Mayans love to have them above the entryway of their shrines and temples. So it is not surprising to see them all featured in a religious tone. And here are some of the Mayan words that I made a special episode during my trip to Guatemala and Honduras you can see on the top right. Do you know that it is somehow grammatically similar to Japanese? And here you see a lintel featuring Lady Zok, one of the highest priestesses in the culture at the time, holding a basket of blood from her own bloodletting ritual, summoning out a double-headed serpent, and from one of its head pops out Yat Balam, the founding ancestor of the dynasty of Yaxchilan, in the guise of an ancient warrior grasping a spear and a shield. The lady looks up to the spirit, full of reverence. And finally, you can see this intricate Mayan stela taken directly from Copan Ruinas. And I will not go into detail here because I made a full-length exploration of Copan Ruinas during my trip to Honduras and Guatemala, and you can check it out on the top right corner. And seeing it featured here in British Museum really made me feel proud that I have not only seen all of these artifacts in person, but also I have traveled to where it comes from. Now my brief 2 days in the United Kingdom is over. It is time to begin my true European adventure. First stop is Rzeszów. Apparently there's a really cheap flight to this town in eastern Poland, and I was just like, why not? And let's go to Rzeszów. Welcome to Rzeszów, Poland. And in the next part, I will show you the hidden secrets of this magnificent town. And if you like today's deep dive into London's British Museum, please click the like button beneath this video and subscribe if you want to check out some of the other videos that I have. Or simply follow me down the memory lane to this charming eastern Polish town.